want to learn, you have to first listen.
Welcome to episode 6 of Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know, a podcast to feed our curious minds. I am Matt O'Donnell, and I want to know who you are, I want to know what you do, I want to know why it was such a big deal in all reality that you had to rewind the tapes to bring them back to the video store. I want to know what matters to you and why. I've spent the past 15 years as a professional bass player, which means I've covered a lot of miles and talked with a lot of people. I've found that the person who's deeply interested in a topic is often much more interesting than the topic itself, and the bigger picture is found in the details. That gives me a fantastic excuse to share conversations with people who I think are great. Today on the podcast, we have music mixing engineer Steven Williamson. Steven is the front-of-house engineer for Sara Evans. He works on various records and is also the score mix engineer for the hit TV show The Chosen. It has been a real joy talking to people of various professions throughout the last handful of episodes. But this time it's going to be pretty nice to get back into my wheelhouse and talk about some music live and in studio with Steven. It is nice to come back around to it for this episode for sure, because when you're in your wheelhouse all the time, you don't necessarily think of the things that you take for granted as being common, that when you're talking to someone else outside your bubble, they don't really get to understand. I think that is very true of the act of mixing a record or a live show. You'll hear Steven and I talk about the notion that it seems like in my discussions with people when I mention mixing, they don't really understand anything other than a singer sings and a band plays and it sounds like a record. And that couldn't be further from the truth. There are hours and hours of meticulous, again, a term you'll hear us use in the podcast, puzzle pieces to arrange to make it all work out right. That takes a lot of taste and skill, and a great mixing engineer is something that when I'm making music, I make sure that there is a huge focus on getting right for the final product to come out. Even though it is a very technical job, it takes a lot of taste and musical know-how to be really great at mixing, and Steven is a true embodiment of that. When I told him that I wanted to have him as a guest on the show, he was very hesitant and was thinking about how he would talk about this technical knowledge, and I kept reassuring him, no, that's not what this is about. This is about the way that you think about things and about the way we think about things conceptually and how to pass that on to you, the listener. I think we were pretty successful at that. Like I said earlier, Steven is the front-of-house mix engineer for Sara Evans. Last year, he also did some work for Patrick Droney. In the studio, he has done some stuff for Jars of Clay, Sean Curran, and also did a recent record for the vocal powerhouse Natasha Greycloud. And as I said, he does all of the score mixing for the TV show The Chosen, which we talk a bunch about at the end of this episode. Even if you aren't familiar with any of those things I just mentioned, you have already heard Steven's work as he mixed the intro music and the outro music for this podcast. Now, here is my insanely fun chat with Steven Williamson. I mean, you know how much of a big fucking Dawes fan I am, and I heard Taylor Goldsmith say one time on a songwriting podcast, he said something about attention span, and he's the first person I've ever really heard say, like, he didn't think our attention spans are so bad. And he used Joe Rogan as an example. He's like, people will listen to 4 hours of something or binge a Netflix show. Like, it's not.
Yeah, it is really interesting.
It's not as bad as we make it out to be. And maybe some of that too is like, there's a big discussion around wrestling right now where.
How big is this discussion really?
I mean, around like 4 million people big.
Okay, that's big.
Yeah. They still depend on live viewership.
Yeah.
And older folk that analyze that kind of thing, who have been in that bubble and comment on it, are like, well, the ratings have never been worse. And it's like, yeah, but they need to find some way to modernize. I guess what I'm saying is, in the same way that like Taylor Goldsmith was saying that about attention span, and he and I are the same age, I cannot relate to someone that is like your girls' age.
Yeah. People
who are under 25. Can they adapt to something that is longer, or is their attention span short because it's all they've ever known? We know better. Like, you and I have a better idea of our attention span having been eroded by social media.
Right.
But when we like still want to like dig our heels in and binge 20 hours of a show, like, it's doable. That like 100%. Muscle memory is there, but I don't know that it's there for younger folk coming of age now.
They have no problem sitting through 3.5 hours of a Taylor Swift concert film.
That's true. Yeah. All right. So, yeah. There's always something.
I don't know. Yeah. There's always something.
There will always be something that makes you want to go in that hard. Okay. So we've officially started this.
Yeah. That's great.
The soft intro.
So 90 minutes.
Yep. Yep. We are there. So that's going to do it.
No, it's all right.
I wanted to start by making the rest of this talk better by addressing your imposter syndrome a little bit.
Oh, no. It's paramount.
I want to dispel it some.
Okay.
Because having been in a professional working situation with you, you are mixing live in that scenario. You're not mixing records. That people in that situation all go on to want you to do recorded mixing for them. And so I think that is a good start to be like that. I don't think you need to think that.
Well, thank you.
That you're some sort of moron.
Well,
in terms of that, but also something that you do well, whether you know it or not, is you do mixing well from a non-just utilitarian standpoint. And by non-utilitarian standpoint, I just mean like someone that just turns knobs and gets levels and goes, yep, that sounds good. Like, you have a more rounded approach to it, which we'll talk about in a second. You are not stuck in a time. A lot of mix engineers in Nashville will only make things that sound like a certain group of records, a certain time period, or things like that. Yeah. And that can happen for a million reasons, but there is that you are technically good and your also understanding of the ecosystem is good. I mean, until you started mixing live for Sara Evans, nobody was checking a PA, in my experience in general, with a song newer than, 2002. And it certainly wasn't, modern pop music.
Yeah.
Which, is whatever it is. And we don't need to get into the like finer details of tuning a PA, using what music, but just that idea that your understanding goes through time and space and still holds a modernity to it.
Thanks,
without having to do that.
Thank you.
So
thank you.
You are not as damaged as you believe.
TBD.
There's still a lot of time left.
Yeah, I can dispel that.
Yeah. So having eased you in now, I think that approaching this for me is a big matter of. It could be very easy for me to talk to music folk and just make it unintelligible to the other 99% of the world. And that is not the point.
Oh, it's not?
No, that is not the point. The point is to be more accessible. And, sometimes doing these talks, I have to like put myself in a certain mindset that might not be my own. Right. And I think this is one of them. I think that mixing recorded music might still be one of the most not understood parts of
They call
what
that
people
misunderstanding. Misunderstanding.
I don't know if it's misunderstood.
Oh,
I think that it might be. I don't think the average person understands what mixing a record is like.
Oh,
I think that at the end of the day, and people can @ me in the show email. That's mattodonaldwantstoknow@gmail.com.
I was just razzing you about misunderstanding, but no, you're much smarter than me. And no.
Well, but it's the thing that I don't think that most people think about. I think that at the end of the day, most people see a record as a karaoke bit of that someone is singing and there just is this track made, and that it doesn't, make any sense that it's in this day and age hundreds of tracks, that are inevitably being bounced down to, for all intents and purposes to, a stereo image left and right. That many things are getting down in there. And so I kind of want you to start, and by start, I mean you begin telling me after 5 minutes of me asking this question.
No, that's fine.
What existentially the mixing process is like from a importance standpoint and things like that. And like exactly what it is.
Well, I can't think about the importance of it, especially lately with my work on The Chosen, of which I mix the score for. Mm-hmm. I have been asked that a number of times. Do you know how important, this is? And I really can't think about it because that's just going to, get in my way or get in the way of just translating what's been given to me. And so the process for me is really to, I relate it back to music school when you're learning to play or sing, or actors act for the person in the last row. You got to communicate all the subtleties, every crescendo, decrescendo, facial expression, whatever, for the very last row. And so to me, it is just squeezing every ounce of emotion and detail out of that recorded music. So I'm very, feelings based about the whole thing. When I start getting goosebumps, then it's like, okay, I'm probably pretty close to being done here. I mean, there's a more mechanical process and things that I do, but
I guess I'm sort of asking you to say in the most speaking to another musician way.
Sure.
What does mixing legitimately do?
Yeah. Well, you could not mix it and it would sound awful. You could.
Some people mix it and it still sounds awful.
So things need to be balanced. Some things need to have, be louder than other things relatively, right? Like
sure.
The vocal is probably going to be louder than other things happening. I mean, there's always exceptions, right? But like,
I know this is such a
generally speaking, you need to hear what they're saying, so we have to just turn it up. But how far is too far, and what if it's not enough, and how do you also get everything else to speak? Because mixing can be a fun puzzle of clarity where you're trying to carve everything to sit together perfectly, and you can hear everything. And those are very impressive to do, but it's not always what you want to do, but that's one way of doing it. And that seems to be a simpler way to explain to people what mixing is. It's like, well, if sound was a puzzle and you wanted to see each piece or hear each piece of the puzzle, then you kind of have to carve it all out so they fit together in a very specific way.
So I think what's very interesting about mixing in general is that, I mean, when I work on stuff, in the few times that I'm willing to take on a production project, I put a huge weight on the mixing.
Yeah.
Because there are so many times that, the standard thing that I say to music folk is, not to the general public, or I do say it. I mean, I do say this to normal people and try and explain it better, is like, at the level of things that I'm normally working on, budget is a very sensitive and specific, issue. And we could do an entire podcast about how to retain budget, for the audience out there. Like, the mixing process happens after everything's recorded. Yeah. It is the process of taking all the things that have been recorded, saying like, these are all the things we want in the song. Or if you want to use your analogy, like the producer has gotten a bunch of puzzle pieces and put them in the box, and then they transfer it to you.
Yeah.
What everybody wants at first in the process of recording is they want to make sure that they get all the parts to the song, all the pieces of the puzzle they want. Yeah. Whether that piece is 8 tracks of guitar played by 3 different people and all these things, live drums and a drum loop that's going to happen. And a lot of times, money gets spent all there.
Yeah.
And then it can be hard for a lot of people to find the means to get a very good, capable mixer to make that sound the best.
Yeah.
Not to take your imposter syndrome and turn it into a superiority complex.
Go ahead.
I'm here to boost your ego for an hour and a half.
Yes, thank you. It needs it.
But, I guess a thing that I would say to the average person that doesn't know about mixing, when they listen to music, it's not a thing they think, is like, it's a big part of what can make your tracks sound like other people's tracks on the radio or in a playlist. Yeah. So that's something, and mastering is a whole other thing. My wife is not a musician, and she often has trouble distinguishing the mixing and mastering process from each other, you know, which are two very different things, although they live in the same kind of space. But that without good mixing in a song, you're not going to end up with something that sounds like other recorded music to you, It's the way that, when you get box sets of things and you hear demo recordings and like that in a lot of ways is the biggest thing. Yeah. Like when you hear a Beatles box set, you're like, okay, here's these take one. They're not mixed the same way that the album track is going to be mixed, and you can tell. And that is often not what is happening musically in a track, that like all those parts are still there. Like I remember when I used to be really into Metallica when I was in high school, I bought so many on eBay CD singles because they would often put out the demos and you'd be like, well, other than James not having lyrics and just like kind of mumbling stuff, a melody over it, it's like, no, this sounds like this Metallica song. Other than a little bit of refinement musically, the thing that makes a demo recording sound the way it does on a box set as opposed to what the actual record is in the mixing. Yeah. Is in like having that mix built out. Yeah. But in you being given that puzzle to work with, I think one of the crazy things that is like misunderstood is that at no point in a lot of instances are you ever interfacing with the artist. And you get sent a Dropbox folder full of stuff.
It's a very lonely gig. I'm in this room by myself 12 hours a day. Never see anybody. Just texting links back and forth.
And waiting for responses.
Waiting for responses. Jeez. Yeah.
3 mix revisions in 4.5 weeks.
Oh, man. Yeah. It happens.
Yeah. Talk to me about, like, given now that we have, like, a lot of that backstory installed for the people who, don't know.
That's what mixing is. Yeah.
I think one of the things that, you do, like, pretty well, and I think good mixers do this, is you have a very musical voice towards, inevitably getting the track to be together. Yeah. I think most people can have an image of like a mixing board, like you're like old school, large studio SSL mixing board. Yeah. And that's a lot of, like faders, knobs, and you're doing that. One could be forgiven for thinking that is like a version of a spreadsheet, where you're just like hitting numbers like that, you turn up the bass to this level and that's what you do. And we get this mix as opposed to having to like craft the intention and stuff. And so talk to me about how that process works when you get stuff from a producer and how they're often conveying to you, like, what this is overall supposed to feel like and stuff like that.
I ask for a reference. What were you listening to? What would you like this to sound like? Send me something on Apple Music or, we just call it a reference. And then I also ask for, if they don't, if they haven't already provided it in the files to me, the last bounce of the session that they did. So what did it sound like the last time you listened to it? And this is really just mixer psychology, expectation setting bi-directionally. Like, they need to set my expectation of, like, this is what we're after. And then I'm asking them for, like, well, what did it sound like the last time you listened to it? So you're expecting it to be really that plus better. They don't always say that, but that is naturally what often happens.
Sure. I mean, there are people like the man of a million shades these days, and by that I mean a million people giving him shade, like a Jack Antonoff, who produces all the Taylor Swift stuff and his own Bleachers thing and Lana Del Rey and 1975 and all that. Yep. I often hear him say, or maybe the last time I heard him say it was on something I watched about him building a Florence and the Machine track, about that, like, often he feels like the mixes that he, like, gives out are pretty good, and he just needs that, like, extra 15% or whatever, which is that's what you're talking about, is like this plus better and more. Do you ever find that different producers have value one way over the other of a reference versus, like, a last bounce? And I ask that because as someone whose desk mix bounces are terrible, meaning me, like, I am not the producer to, like, do that references are much more important for me.
Right. I don't.
And does it matter to you?
It doesn't really matter. The most oftentimes they're gonna want to hear what they had, but better. And it is true. Like, a lot of producers are capable mixers themselves. They just either don't have the bandwidth or the headspace, or they know that it can be elevated. So they'll hire a dedicated mix engineer. I heard Michael Brower calls it match and improve. So match their mix and then up from there. Which is a good way to think about it. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. I know some guys will just take they just want the session as it last was, and they will have every plugin already on there, like leave it exactly, and they'll start from there. So however you get there, by ear or just picking up where they left off, whatever works for you. But I think at the end of the day, for me as a mixer, like, I'm just going to be myself. If it's so important to me that the music that I'm working on has a feeling of authenticity, not just from the artist, but producer and engineer and mixing engineer and mastering engineer, that that's what I'm going to give to the project. It's like, this is my expression. That sounds a little lofty towards myself, but
well, it shouldn't be.
It's also like, that's just what I know how to do. Like, I can emulate people's mixes, but, like, if you wanted that, just go hire that person. So for me, it's like, I'm gonna do my thing, and I can aim for, like, I can understand, okay, you're going after this, so this is gonna be, like, my expression in that direction, stylistically or whatever. But that's really important to me. That's why I kind of, is it ref or is it the last known bounce? That's more important. It's like, kind of doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, I'm going to do me.
I think that's one of the reasons I like you so much in terms of your job use, is that mixers are artists. Like, not in like the way of saying like in a recording project that like this person is the artist or whatever. But it is art in its own way. Like in the recording process, every step of the way has art involved.
To me, it very much is that. This is absolutely the mindset, the lane that I'm running in 24/7. Yeah. There is no right or wrong way to mix a record. Therefore, it's just going to have to be your own expression. Yeah. And every choice you make is part of that artistic process. That's why I love it so much still. It's why every mix feels new and different. I'm not one of those mixers who could tell you like, oh, what's that vocal chain you used on something from 5 years ago or yesterday. Yeah. It happens in the moment. It falls out of me. Yeah. And then ejected. Like I don't remember. Yeah. I would really have to dig up recall sheets and open sessions to tell you, like, because in the moment it needed something. I did it and I turned it in. They liked it. And then I moved on.
Yeah, so that's sort of what a better way of what I was getting at by using that spreadsheet analogy.
Yeah.
Of being like, of talking about vocal chains and stuff like that, and being like, sometimes you just end up in places, and it's that way with. I mean, it's that way with every part of the process, the recording process. Like, sometimes you end up with, if you're the kind of person that has 15 guitar pedals. Yeah. And synthesizers are a good example of that too. Yeah. That you turn a bunch of knobs and it's not like, oh, let me call up this setting. Nope. And it's like, oh, well, oftentimes you can't figure out what knob put that like little bit of spice in a track, and you go, well, let's just get it now. And it can be nearly impossible to get back. That's right. But it's character. Right. Yeah. Like it's definitely like installing.
That's what makes it awesome.
Character. Yeah. And it requires good ears and good taste. Yeah. To like latch onto something and like follow it through. Yeah. Instead of, it's not balancing chemical equations where like it has to equal out. Yeah. It's like, that's the nice thing about audio, is you can always find something, latch onto it, and get it printed. Yeah. Get it on the track and let's dedicate it, because we might not ever have it again. Right. Yeah. And I think that's what is really special about having a capable mix engineer that has taste. I am often fascinated by the history of mixing. Not that I go like deep into it, but I like a lot of old music. I am blessed by whatever mechanism allows me to love old music and love brand new music. Yeah. And everything in between, just like the whole sea of it. But it's special. When you think about really old stuff, think about people that like tracked a lot of like classical music and stuff. Like I am thinking about the experience of, as I often do, the Beatles, like working with George Martin, who was someone that was working at EMI in classical music. And, at the end of the day was really what helped them become more serious. And I'm not even talking about when they got more experimental. I'm talking about just in terms of like going from being a bar band, taking a bunch of uppers to do 4 sets in Hamburg a night, to being a polished band in the studio. And, obviously he was a musician, but George Martin even talked about being around a lot of guys who were just knob turners and fader. Like they just got the mathematical levels. They had lab coats. Yeah, they did. They legitimately had lab coats on in the studio, and like that is not the thing. No. This crosses over into producing as well, but like think about music producers who weren't musicians at all. Like in the 60s. Yeah. People that like worked for labels, and they were just A&R people who also, could be like, nope, that isn't it, because they understood the A&R in a way that made it. At that time, we're talking about 2-track recording, 4-track recording. That's the amount that you had, and mixing and recording has become such a bigger, more complex process. Like I said, nowadays you're getting given a couple hundred tracks to make into a stereo left and right track. But when it was 4-track and 8-track, it was so much more about the taste and ear and like understanding of like the whole process rather than just getting something technical.
Yeah. And every choice was more consequential.
Yeah, because you're working on tape and you had no...
Yeah, and there's only so many tracks, and you got to build the song, and that is what I love so much about, because it becomes a lot more about the performance and executing and playing, and the engineer at that time is just trying to capture it well.
Yeah.
And there's not the next thought that happens today, which is like, cool, let's double that, let's stack it, let's do all this other, production work on it, which is totally great also, but like it can start to, I don't know, prop up maybe what wasn't that great of a performance or that great of a song.
Sure.
And we kind of have to add production to like make up for that or supplement that somehow.
Yeah.
I think those classics are classics not because they're old, but because they were just genuinely awesome performances. Yeah. And I still think that happens today.
Oh, all the time it happens today.
Yeah.
But also all the time it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And you have to like pound it like dough really hard to get it to be something worthwhile.
Man, live performances are really interesting to me. Part of why I really enjoy it is like it's just a moment in time that comes and goes.
Yeah.
If the listener could see me right now, I'm making a circular motion with my finger. The record repeats over and over in one form. And so you can see how these are very different art forms in the sense like making a record is just that kind of recording, making a record of what happened at one time and place that is going to be repeated over and over again for others to listen to in the same way each time, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have a live performance, go to a concert, and it's just the moment happens and then it leaves you.
Yeah.
Comes and it goes. And that way there's a lot more grace. There's a lot more excitement, possibilities, and a carefreeness that is a good carefree. Like, well, if this doesn't work, like we don't have to keep doing it that way. We can just change it next show. And that's really cool to me.
I'm a sucker for live things and there are so many bands that I enjoy a lot that the minute that there's like a live album, I am much more prone to listen to that than I am to the studio versions.
Yeah.
Not in a like Grateful Dead kind of way where it's like the record only serves to like familiarize you with a song that's going to happen in a show. But like,
you ever listen to a live performance and then go get the record and you're like, wow, that live performance was way better? It
just happened to me like in the past week or so.
I'm finding that more and more, which is really interesting to me. I used to hold up these records, and maybe it's just the order in which I'm consuming it sometimes, but it is an interesting concept, and I would encourage people to try it, is to not listen to someone's record first and then go see the live show. Go to the live show and then put in the record that they're releasing or something, and then just let us know which one you liked better. I'm kind of a believer that these MDs and artists that are working together to put together a live show might have it more right than when they were making the record. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wish that there was more like thinking like that.
Yeah.
Like if we were putting on a live show, it would go like this. Now, if we were making a record, it would do this, and maybe record both or whatever you got to do to figure out which one is actually better. Because I do think that oftentimes there is one that's like, oh, that one's clearly better.
Yeah. So I have two thoughts about that. The first is that I just went to see Dawes and Lucius are doing a tour right now where they are performing as one band. Other than knowing that the two women that people think of as being Lucius, that is with no disrespect to the other two guys who are in the band,
right?
And let's be honest, that's sort of borne out by the fact that they were not there for this tour. It was just the two of them. Other than knowing that the two women met at Berkeley, while I was there, I think I met one of them once while I was there. Which I say because everybody always wants to know, like, oh, you were there at the same time as these people. Did you know these people?
Sure.
It's like, no, I'm pretty sure I met one of them once. But knowing that, I only really knew like two of their songs and their work with like Brandi Carlile.
Yeah.
Those were like the things I like really knew about them. And I didn't get time to adequately like try and scour their catalog or their Spotify This Is Lucius playlist.
Yeah.
I heard songs at the show.
Yeah.
And I went home that night and like looked at setlist.fm to see what the setlist was like and listened to a bunch of those songs. And I was like, no, these are not for me.
Yeah. See?
That was for me.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot to explore there. And I want my producer friends listening to like think about that. Is it because there's the carefreeness of like, well, it's a moment in time. Yeah. So there's not this pressure that like what we put down is going to live repeated forever, you know?
Yeah.
Somebody might put it on a Tesla and send it into space. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like there's all this pressure for them to try to get it quote unquote right. But when they put together a live performance, it's not going to be recorded. People, going to show up and we're going to play the thing. It's like, yeah, I think it has something to do with that, but there's a lot more folks should be exploring.
Yeah. And I think we're opening up a whole like can of shit here, but like there's a broad spectrum for things like that. Mm-hmm. And I think that for every step that modern music creators take in the direction of being more open to more things, the more they also narrow. Like they take a step in each direction simultaneously.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Because, for instance, I can't imagine any of the tracks on Thriller being cut live.
Right.
In a way that would make them better.
Right.
To me.
Yeah.
Like there's something about that like meticulous, not to use the puzzle analogy again in a similar but different way, but just like puzzling together those tracks to be exactly what they are. Like in a lot of cases they needed that.
Yeah.
And you'll get people who feel that way about music like that like latch onto that and go, well, look, because this happened, it is better that we meticulously piece together every single thing about a track to make it perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this as, I mean, not that the average listener is thinking about that, but I'm thinking about this for people who are fans of music.
Yeah.
That there are people who are fans of, records that are primarily made live in the room who would say that that's terrible. And they're both right.
Yeah.
For different kinds of music.
It's not right for every artist. It's not right for every record.
No.
I see it a lot in different genres of music too, like singer-songwriters will put on like a phenomenal live show, and then I go hear this thing that's like really flushed out in production, and it's like, oh, that kind of took away from the song.
I think that's a genre that's hard to nail, though.
Yeah.
Because you're telling that story.
Right.
I was going to say that sounds trite, but it probably only sounds trite because we live in that space and hear people say that all the time, often disingenuously, you know,
Yeah.
but that like those instances are about conveying the story.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes when a singer-songwriter is playing live, their connection to the story makes it that, and with the people that they're touching with that story, you know, they've touched through the record and things like that.
Yeah.
They are more interested in that moment than recreating anything.
Yeah.
You said that about shows and being moments in time and stuff like that. And that's what I was thinking about. That's what you made me start thinking about that Dawes and Lucius show. That like one, it feeds the same purpose to me. That like one, I was saying about like the Lucius songs, me liking them better performed that way than anything I'd heard on the record.
Yeah.
But also, given that it wasn't a phenomenal sounding show in a cave, there were moments that still made me appreciate being there.
Yeah.
Like I will, even though, and this is something that like Amanda, because she like felt bad because like they're one of my favorite bands and like we had a terrible sight line and because it was a standing room only show and I got tall people. I'm not very tall and
my bad.
3 dudes. Yeah. You can speak for every tall man there's ever been at a show.
I apologize for every.
But you know, honestly, the problem was that it was both. If it had sounded incredible and I couldn't see, I would just close my eyes and put my head down and enjoyed that moment. But it was like hard to balance the two things out. You know, at some point they did this Joni Mitchell song. Well, that made it all worth it. Like being in that cave with these people, like doing this Joni Mitchell song this way, made every bit, even the negative parts, absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
And I think that like that's the power of that, like that thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, shared time and shared experiences like that. So powerful.
And yet here you are as a lonely mix engineer.
I'm just all by myself. That's right. Yeah, it is juxtaposed. Yeah.
Tell me how you got into wanting to do this.
Man, that's a fun story. Where to start?
I mean, I know some of it, but it's, so I guess like a question, since, you know, like we're talking so much about records, but you do live mixing, you know, as well, like at a very like good and high level. Which did you want to do first?
Live engineering was a means to build my engineering chops in the studio.
Got it.
It was a calculated decision and advised to me by one of my very first mentors, Marius Perrone in San Antonio. And he was like teaching these engineering classes, and it was engineering for the studio, and I would do that. I would go to those classes and really loved it. But then he had connections at this church where they were hiring live engineers, and it was just a way to like be doing the thing a lot. Just because it was a mega church and there was, I forget, 10 different services in 7 days every week. And
those spaces are often calculated to be good mixing environments.
Yes. Yeah. And this was like still really early of digital mixing consoles. So for the most part, it wasn't those, because those were so new and expensive. So it was still like analog consoles at front of house, which I still love. So it was just really, really good way to like be handling microphones every day, to be EQing something every day, listening, using outboard gear, effects mostly, right? But compressors too.
Somewhere somebody may be hearing this and just got offended that you didn't call a compressor an effect.
Oh gosh. Get out of here.
That's one for the nerds.
Yeah.
I'm leaving it in there for the nerds.
That's fine. Yeah.
Sorry, Gen Pop.
Yeah, so I started touring with this band called Nothing More. And
what was that band like?
They're still around. They're killing it. They do huge festivals in Europe. Nominated for a Grammy. One of the guys in the band was a roommate at Belmont, best man at my wedding. The other guys were in my wedding in some capacity, the groomsmen or usher, whatever. And then I kind of giggled to myself just a second ago because you had said people end up going into the studio with me from a live experience, and that was kind of the first time that it happened.
Yeah.
It was a hard rock band, and they wanted to make like a cool little quote-unquote acoustic record. But it was like acoustic guitars and a lot of programming.
Yeah. So it was like 1980s MTV Unplugged, where like it really wasn't.
Yeah,
it was just
but
like
it was
that with acoustic guitars, but nothing
but a
else.
ton of like loops and synths and stuff, and it was really fun. Yeah, that's a little bit about how I was kind of working the studio thing as a producer first. Because I have a music composition degree.
I don't think I knew that about you.
Yeah, started at Belmont 2002, 2003 as a commercial guitar major. Ran out of money, as you do. And then went back home to San Antonio and finished at University of Texas, San Antonio. Go Roadrunners. Meet.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And then that's right.
Sometimes I am reminded that you are from Texas. It's easy to forget. And then every once in a while.
Every once in a while. It sneaks in. I try to keep it down, but it comes out. I was writing a lot of my own songs, like kind of quirky Ben Folds-esque kind of stuff of my own.
The kind of thing that someone that was studying composition would write?
That's right. Yeah. Just call it what it is. It's exactly. That's exactly what it was. But my friends liked the songs, but they had their own thing and their own band going, and they're like, hey, can you help us with our song? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so I would give them pointers, and we'd write together, and they said, we're going to go to the studio. Do you want to come? And I'd go, and they would ask, what do you think? I'm like, that part, like, try a different part. That's dumb or whatever. I had no bedside manner or tact at that time.
Sure.
But the engineer was like, hey, like, you're doing a great job producing. It's turning out really well. And I was like, is that what I'm doing? Like, I was just kind of being in the room, being like, well, I don't know about that. Try something else.
I sort of have the same experience with that in terms of how production happened. I think, or slightly different. I think I've always wanted to be a producer.
Yeah.
And launching into a music career, just playing the bass.
Yeah.
And then working around producers.
Right.
It is easy to think, like, I can't do that. Like, or misunderstanding what happens and being like, there's no way that I could be equipped to be that person. Or, again, in talking about, like, the shades of things. I have some friends who are great producers, but they're the kind of producers that play every instrument on a track.
Yeah.
And being like, well, I'm just not going to be that guy.
Right.
So I can't do that.
Right.
And then the amount of times that, like, it became a thing of people going like, hey, like, will you do this for me? And being like, I don't know that I can do that. And then having to, like, understand differently how I could be effective in that role. And then being like, oh no, I think that this is what
absolutely
a good slice of these kind of people do.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many different kind of producers too. And there's some that become stereotyped, or like there's the track guys. Yeah. And then there's what I would say, like, the really old school producers who don't play anything, and they're just kind of tastemakers. And I struggled with that too, because I was producing in Texas doing Texas country music, and I was engineering my own stuff at that time too. But as soon as I started hiring session players, I could no longer play anything on stuff that I did because I was always constantly reminded, like, it could be this. And not that I'm any slouch on the guitar. I don't call myself a player, but there's a touch that comes with a lot of session players that I could never hear in my own playing.
It's mileage, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it is great taste. It's great playing, but so much of it is like, and sometimes it's the thing I struggle with doing more session work is like, I don't have the hours.
Yeah.
You know, like in that mindset.
Right.
Like you are in a different perspective of how to play this instrument.
Yeah.
And get those things out of it.
And what draws your interest can be very surprising to someone at any point in their life.
Yeah.
And where I was a commercial guitar major, but suddenly like find myself, you know, this guy who was complimenting me on producing this thing with my friends, I was equally like very interested and impressed with what he was doing as an engineer. But I'm like, well, what is that though? Like, because that seems cool. And then that's what took me into like engineering school with Marius. And but my interest suddenly was just like, oh, I really like this Pultec EQ.
Yeah.
This Manley ELOP really takes up a lot of my brain space and thinking about it.
So here's a question for you, because so much of that as a producer is understanding multiple languages. The language of the music, as a like actual like purely like, again, musical puzzle form. There is the you aptly used the term bedside manner before. Yeah. The part of like when you're really working with an artist and you have to like get into a personal relationship with them. Yeah. You know, which is, we could go on forever about how important that is. And then there's also whatever level of understanding the language of the technical stuff. Yeah. And I think that for so many people, I think it's hard to not want to say, well, I can do some of this myself now. Yeah. Like as a producer, because like if you have to learn the language of engineering enough to be able to converse with the engineer, right? Well, you get to understand the principles in a way that makes you do at least some degree of it. Yeah. Yeah. You know, especially in the modern, in the box laptop recording kind of world. Yeah. For better or worse. That's, you know, that's not to say that like, oh, we have access to this now and so we can do it, but it's just like, right. You know,
the interesting part about mixing these days, because I mean, anytime this comes up in my head, every time somebody talks about the bedroom producer, it's just like, there was a time when like the tracks coming to a mix engineer were going to be of a certain standard or level of excellence. Yep. Because they were using one of 4 different kinds of very high-end vintage, you know, microphones on the vocal in a professional studio in a great sounding room. You know what I mean? Like there was just these things.
I mean, for lack of a better term, it's, you know, I want you to continue explaining this, but I would say that the header is the shit in, shit out principle. Yeah. You know, which is another thing. Like if you don't, as a mix engineer, if you aren't given tracks that, or it is so much easier to do your job and come up with something that makes you sound very smart, you know, like intelligent and like brilliant and prolific as a mix engineer, when you're given raw audio that sounds great, was captured great.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so now there's all these tools to basically account for the wide range of tracks you're going to get. And this is why, I mean, like templating is very important for workflow and speed and just like, but like there's just not a lot of painting by numbers for me, because every source I get is so different.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
So that's another reason why, you know, I can't remember what I did on that vocal yesterday.
Yeah.
It was like, because it was different than the one the day before and the day before that. And like, they're all so different, and I can't keep up. I just did what it needed for that track. There's just so many variables that goes into making the record. In that way, it is exciting, but it can also be extremely frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm excited about how records are getting made still. I think people are finding new ways of being authentic and bringing authenticity into their music, whether that means making records in their bedroom.
Yeah.
It happens.
We can be old men about it and say bedroom producers these days don't know the horrors of using a Tascam 4-track cassette recorder
to
make records in their bedroom.
Yeah.
Having a 2-input recording interface, but with the ability to record infinite tracks is something that producers.
Yeah.
But again, it goes into that concept of limitations create, you know, like, you know, the most intimidating thing is the blank page, you know, like the minute you just draw a line on it somewhere, you've created a parameter with which to have to work around and stuff like that.
Totally. I can't crap on the
absolutely not.
Bedroom producers. Do I wish that after a certain point, it's like you can afford to like go to a studio, like you should, but they don't.
Do you think this will get us back on track instead of being old men yelling at the sky? Okay, which thing should the bedroom producer do first? Go work in a bigger, more professional studio, or learn the concepts of recording to a higher degree than they have? Which do you think would be more helpful? Again, like if we try and frame this talk around you being given something to mix. This always seems to happen in consecutive podcasts with me. I just talked with my friend Robbie about him shooting the Grammys for this album. Say you mixed the first Billie Eilish record.
Yeah.
And you know,
I did not, but let's say we did. Yeah.
Like let's say that you were.
Be a lot cooler if I did.
Yeah, you sure would be. You're pretty cool, but I cannot give you those kind of props.
Yeah.
And obviously that record is better in terms of like what is on it than most bedroom records. But like, let's just say you were given a record like that they gave it to you, you mixed it, made it sound great, but you felt like there was a lot of room to grow.
Yeah.
In terms of what you were given.
Yeah.
Would doing those tracks in a more professional studio be more beneficial to you, or would going off and learning more about how to capture something better in any environment, just from an audio principles perspective, be more beneficial to what you get given?
I think that I would answer that by saying going and working in a studio as an assistant, sitting under somebody, being an apprentice to somebody, having a mentor.
Well, it'll make your legs go numb.
Yeah.
You said sitting under somebody.
Yes.
Stupid joke.
Thanks, Dad. So my reason for answering that way is because I think that is where people can learn to listen the most. Even if your goal was to record better tracks, and in a Billie Eilish case, it's I think it's just her vocal. Maybe, I don't know, if maybe they're doing some live drums on a couple of tracks, but I think for them, by and large, it's programmed.
Yes.
Which is great.
Yep.
And I think Phineas kills all that stuff.
Yeah.
Good.
It was such a weird, I was trying to use an example that people would know.
Yeah. No, and people do know that. Yeah.
Yeah. To frame it. But like, even though that lots of that was done in their bedroom, that is a record that sounded great.
Yeah.
You know, like it does not suffer from what we're talking about.
And just as a quick aside, the Billie Eilish stuff kills being made in her bedroom because that's where she's comfortable creating.
Sure. Yeah.
And artists have to be comfortable as like a very, I say bare minimum. It's not an easy minimum to achieve. It's very, very difficult sometimes to get an artist to feel absolutely themselves enough to get in the right headspace to perform like that. So all that to say, keep doing what you're doing, Billy. But learning how to listen, because if your goal is to record better tracks, if you know what you're listening for, you'll start asking the right questions, and you'll get there very quickly on well, it's sounding too dull and dead or whatever, and I want it to be brighter on the front end. And I think, then you're going to start asking the right questions if you already know like what you're aiming for because of your ear training.
Yeah.
And that's why I answer that way. Like 100% just find somebody to sit under.
Yeah. So we've been talking for a while, so let's...
Did you get what you want to know? I mean,
I do, yeah.
Matt O'Donnell wants to know.
Uh-huh.
You got what you wanted to know?
I think so.
It's not much.
It's not much, but it's honest work.
It's not much from me.
But how can I do this talk without talking about you being the chosen one?
I do mix the score for The Chosen.
Yes.
Which makes a great joke calling me the chosen one.
I know. I'm really glad that I thought of that.
Yeah, only you would have.
I want to cover a couple things about that in brief without you having to go on about it.
Yeah.
The three things I want to know are, how'd that come about? How is mixing a score for you, adding in a third level of being someone that mixes live, someone that mixes something in the studio that is going to come with no visual component, and then also working on this in that way.
So the way The Chosen came to me was I had known Matt Nelson, who's one of the composers, for probably 5 years. We met at a Christmas party at Sputnik, which is Vance Powell and Mitch Dane's studio in Berry Hill. And just connected real quick. And then I did some live sound for Jars of Clay when they were going to play top to bottom one of the records. And they asked me to do front of house for that, and I thought that was super cool. So I got to know Dan, the lead singer of Jars, through that, and he's the other composer to The Chosen. So I knew the two guys, and I knew that they had been approached about doing the score for this show about Jesus.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, sounds about right. Cool. And that show ended up going into development, and they got to compose the score for a whole season, and Shane Wilson mixed the first season. And that was super cool. And then time to do a second season, and then comes to find out Shane had sold his studio and was kind of switching and moving on to other things. And so then it became a hunt for a new mix engineer. And they called me, asked me if I'd be interested. I said, yeah. They did tell me some other people's names that they were considering. And I immediately was intimidated. Was like, yep.
There's no way.
Not coming to me. Yeah. Great. So, because this is weird and you might cut it, but I'm pretty sure I was the only one that didn't have a Grammy on this list of people. Truly.
That means they could afford you.
Well, to great thanks to Gina Johnson, who had also been approached about doing it. Wasn't I think the schedule didn't work out, but she totally endorsed me, and I'm so grateful to her for that. And so they gave me a shot, and that was, so I got to mix season 2 We've done 3, 4 is out now. And, you know, there's about, I've done the math once, and I can't remember. So, you know, there's like an average of 15 cues an episode. It's 8 episodes.
Yep.
I've done 3 seasons now. We've done hundreds of cues. And I can count on one hand how many times Matt and Dan have asked for a revision. It is the most unique mixing experience and collaborative experience that I've ever had in my career. The best clients a mix engineer could ask for. They're operating out of this place where it just kind of falls out of them. I'm doing the same thing, and it's just all working and clicking, and it is truly something special. I love it.
That's awesome. I will interject this question. Is there anything unique about the way that are there any like unique challenges to mixing it, knowing that it's going to get mixed then with dialogue and then pushed out?
So I do have video when I mix. It is a rough version of, I mean, it's locked picture, but the dialogue hasn't been cleaned up yet. So it could still have a lot of mic rustling and that kind of things. But what is unique is, like, as a good player does, and they are, they're going to play in the holes, as we would say in record making, where like, if you're going to play something that draws attention to itself, do it when they're not talking. So they naturally do that. But then I'm, like I started by saying, like, squeezing the juice, squeezing all the emotion out of it. I'm exaggerating that. And I'm using the dialogue. So instead of a lead vocal, I've got a dialogue to work with. And that is pretty unique to film mixing, in my opinion. I try to stay out of the way of the dialogue until I've got some holes to really exaggerate things.
But otherwise from that, you're not having to, like, sonically alter much from what you would normally do in terms of, like... I try to keep it natural. It's not overly compressed. It is a little bit different in the sense of, like, I do a stereo mix and then I print stems, which is like groupings of instruments, so all the cellos, all the percussion, you know. And then that's what gets sent to the post-production house in Burbank. And they use those, and that's mostly for flexibility. We're not really changing the balance after it's already been mixed. Those sometimes that can happen in moments, but it's more for, like, maybe that one part could start a little sooner, and that's where we need the granularity of the stems. That makes sense. I guess that is in a lot of ways, like, I guess what I was asking. That's a bit different. That's a less of a you part, and more that, but that, like, in that instance, they are using those more than anything. I thought about it, you know, since you've been, you know, on my list, mostly because I knew that I could have access to you, not because that's right. Of things of thinking about asking about that, just because of, like anything, I think of something and then I can rationalize this, but people's TV listening environments are very different.
That's right.
You know, like the fact that there are plenty of people that probably watch The Chosen on their phone, you know, like phone in the break room or whatever, and getting it to work in all those scenarios. But I say that, and music is the same way. Now people do that with music, you know, from
the same thing.
Terrible AirPods, you know, with speakers that don't differentiate anything, all the way up to being in, you know, a room like this to listen to, or the way my studio is. Like, I was like, this room isn't tuned for anything, but it's a great room to listen to things in. It's like a music float tank, but you get all of that, and it's like, there's a spectrum of that, and I want to romanticize and say that, like, I would imagine TV is more that you have to figure out a way to get that music to be effective in all of those listening environments. But it's true of music too, you know?
I would say it's the same as music, like you described, different listening environments, but even expanded further into like, well, theatrical environments. And now there's like Atmos theatrical environments and 5.1 theatrical environments and then home theater environments. Yeah. And that is very tricky. But now I get to mix in 5.1 and in Atmos, and it's awesome. I love it.
Has anything changed about Doing the Chosen as that has gotten to be more popular? Because like for the first 2 seasons, it was really only accessible in their own proprietary app and stuff. And now for a minute there, all the seasons were on Netflix, and now one season on Netflix and all of them are on Peacock. Like it has a broader reach no matter what, how anyone feels about the idea of there being a Jesus show with that kind of reach and popularity. But like, has anything about the process changed as it has become more of a like...
We're accounting for more formats. We're future-proofing in that sense. Everybody's got their different deliverability standards, like Netflix has theirs, and prepping these files to go to a theater in 5.1. And where does that 5.1 come from? Is it a 5.1 mix, or is it a 5.1 down render of the Atmos mix we did, etc.? QCing for all of those. So there's a little bit more work involved, but we're just having to account for all of it, make sure that we're checking all the boxes and making sure it's right for each one.
Yeah, I dig that. Last little couple things. There's some things I feel like I would be shortchanging without asking, especially since we are sitting in a room that is set up for Atmos mixing. Yeah. We'll start with Atmos because it's a thing. Like, obviously you feel good enough about it to have gotten a rig and be proficient in mixing Atmos, but tell me your feelings on that being the next wave and accessibility in the way that 5.1 has been around for the majority of my life. Yeah. But it's not a thing that most people engage in. Yeah. And how does Atmos, just looking around, how many speakers do you have?
There's 7 around us in the, ear height level. Yep. And then there's 4 above us. Uh-huh. And then there's LFE. I use 2 subs. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a lot. It kind of goes into that home audio, nerd. There are always those people that are well, I've got 5.1 and it's, the people have always been like that. And then there are people who will never care or never be able to reach that standard. And I'm not here to naysay Atmos, I don't, it's just one of those things where it's interesting because I don't think it's for musically. Yeah. Theatrically is different because that's a whole.
And that was a big driver for me. It was, especially at the time when I made the plunge, which was end of 2022, I was I think this makes sense for me because I'm doing a lot of score work. Yeah. But I don't know if I would have done it if I wasn't doing a bunch of score work, right? Or theatrical release stuff. I think Atmos as a format for some genres of music, because I think it lends itself to be very fun and exciting in pop music, and less so in other genres of music, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I think if you can get in a room like mine, where you have a near field environment with 11 speakers, it is awesome. It is super cool. Yeah. And you've not heard music in that way. You're not getting, in my opinion, the same experience in headphones with your AirPod Pros and Maxes. Sure, yeah. Those playback devices, headphones, earbuds sound great. But if you're trying to take this immersive experience and put it in, a left-right headphone, earpod, whatever, it's just not. I don't think you're gonna get there, in my opinion. At least as if the way the technology stands right now, it might get there. I'm not sure how.
I'm so fascinated by this, and it's such a like bargain bin to dive through.
Mm-hmm.
When box sets of records come out, and there's a Blu-ray with a 5.1 mix of something on it. And it's like, do I care about Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers in 5.1? I don't think so.
No.
You know?
No.
I think it leads to a broader question, which we could have an entire podcast about. I guess I sort of asked it in mentioning about the theatrical stuff, but like sometimes that is like, if we say it's the future, we often say things about that, like even when like quad was a thing,
yeah.
In the 70s, like this is the future. And you want to, when you say that, you are saying it in a way that is like, this should be the future for everybody. Like, this is the vision for like a utopian listening experience for the world.
Yeah.
And, like, it's just not realistic that like everybody in the world is going to have Atmos.
That's probably correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I say that in a way that's like, I am chagrin to make a mockery of Atmos. Like I have sat in this room and listened to great stuff and been like, yep, that's it. That's like cool. That is probably the best way to hear this song.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Like it's weird to watch certain things like Quad. Quad is a great example because 5.1 stuck around if you wanted it.
Yeah.
And Atmos, I think, will be the same way, but Quad was the kind of thing that like died.
Yeah.
Truly. Specifically for the reason that it's just like, well, why am I going to take the time to mix this in Quad?
Yeah.
And because most people aren't going to have systems and there's no point.
Right. Yeah.
Or whatever.
Atmos is exciting in the same sense, I would imagine, when stereo was emerging.
Yeah.
And I mean that in a way like there wasn't immediate consensus that the kick, bass, snare, and vocal would come out of both sides equally.
Sure.
At first, it was like all the drums to the left.
Yep.
Everything else to the right.
Well, that's the way. If you listen to those 2009 Beatles remasters, anything that was mixed in or was originally recorded to be in mono, and if the tracks are grouped, it's like they're unlistenable in headphones.
Yeah. Because
it's just like, I don't want to only hear the vocals in my right side.
Yeah.
Like they're meant to be in a like open air stereo way.
Yeah.
Yet they, for a long time, were the standard mixes of things. And
exactly.
Like,
so there was no, and in Atmos, there's a similar thing happening. Mm-hmm. And when my approach to mixing in Atmos is I'm not playing it safe, but I want it to be classic.
Yeah.
So I want it to be tasteful.
Going back to, again, I mean, like we started a long time ago by saying like, that is one of the things that I appreciate about you as a mix engineer is the idea that like you approach it with taste and as though you are operating in the artistic process to make sure that the whole thing is good.
Just because that tambourine can spin around your head doesn't mean it should.
No tambourine. That should be a mix rule. That should become gospel. No tambourine needs to go 360 around your head for any reason.
I mean,
what a terrible sound for that.
But there's in my opinion, there's weird things happening out there in Atmos. It's like, and to me, it just sounds like, we're figuring it out. There's grace for that because we haven't established like, let's not put all the drums to one side, they had to do.
For sure.
Coming up with stereo. So it's interesting.
Because I just asked Robbie about this the last time when I talked to him for the last episode, I feel like it's worth asking you, where do you see mixing and AI going?
I try not to think about it.
Sure. Well,
no, but I think
Robbie said for photography that there's a lot that is just not going to be AI comparable for like, he does a lot of editorial work and like magazine work and stuff. And you're just probably not going to get a famous musician doing an album cover to be like, you've got a good shot of my head, just AI it into a cover. Like they wouldn't want to do that. As I thought about that, when I was like putting that interview together and then thinking about talking to you next. His line on it was, he was like, he as a creative person doesn't need to be scared yet, and hopefully ever.
Yeah.
I don't know that I feel the same way about the potential for mixing.
My hope is that AI won't achieve that human touch.
Yeah.
It also isn't gonna, in my understanding of it, would have a hard time with a mixed revision.
Sure.
So when they get mixed notes, because that's a whole art form in a different episode unto itself, is like, okay, someone says they want these 5 things turned up. It's like, well, okay, I could turn them up, or I can like turn some other stuff down, or I can EQ or compress something differently. There's a million ways to go about that. Yeah,
it is not as simple as doing the one thing.
Right. It's never that simple. So how would AI make those decisions is really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's a collaboration. How do you collaborate with AI? I don't know. I don't feel worried because
It's weird, right? Because it is big enough that it feels like talking about and worrying about. But every time you really dig into it, you can at least walk away from the discussion by saying, well, at least not yet. Like, as it stands now, we can't do the thing that you're just mentioning, like about how to make decisions about mixed revisions yet.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
We don't know, and no one that is saying that we know is right.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
But I hope that the human touch stays authentic and artistic in that way.
Yeah.
You know, it may have a place, and it should be talked about. And there are some spaces where it is really important, especially in Hollywood, SAG-AFTRA world. Like they're fighting the good fight to make sure that that the train stays on the tracks.
No, I think that's true.
Yeah.
I have one example of a counter argument to the SAG-AFTRA thing, though.
Okay.
And it's very specific. After the last thing that James Earl Jones did the voice of Darth Vader for Star Wars, he said that was it for him. Like, he couldn't do it anymore. I mean, James Earl Jones is old. Like, he doesn't,
Sure.
At some point you got to stop.
Yeah.
However, he's the voice of Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Is it worth, in that instance, some sort of agreement?
Yeah.
Whether your family gets paid, however it works. Like, I believe, as a Star Wars fan and a continuity person, there should be some way to figure out how to be able to use the voice of James Earl Jones via AI anytime Darth Vader is in a Star Wars medium from now on. Because that's the voice rather than having something different. Because that's an achievable. It's way different than, younging an actor or putting, or AIing someone's face onto a different actor to like get them in the thing.
Well, didn't Star Wars...
They did that.
J.J. Abrams in one of 6, 7, or 8 or something...
Whichever one it was that they had like Moff Tarkin
or 7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
Yeah,
might have been Rogue One where like Moff Tarkin's in it.
Ooh, yeah, and it was Rogue One.
And he was dead.
Yeah, he had already died, but they got his permission or the family's estate permission to like AI his face onto or computer whatever trick they used, whether there's AI, I don't know.
Whatever.
But they put it on someone else's face, and they used like basically voice technology to recreate it, which was really interesting, and I think that is a great counter argument and something worth exploring. But it does have it's going to require some
it's
kind
hard
of permission,
because I think that specific is worth exploration to get this thing. How many exceptions happen? Like, then do you make enough exceptions that it breaks down the moral conceptual wall? It's tough.
I love Star Wars. I want to see more. However, as an artist, you can't help but wonder, like, at some point you just got to let the art live, and just be on its own, and we don't have to create more and more and more of these things,
Yeah, I think the thing about something like Star Wars is it's hard when you create art where you have to create a world for the story to live in.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily, instead of like a story that is plunged into what would conceivably be the real world.
Yeah.
Totally. All right, that's all I've got for you. Thanks so much for doing this.
You're the best, babe.
Yeah. There you have it. That was a nice, thoughtful chat with my buddy Steven Williamson. Whether this is your first, second, fourth, or sixth time listening to Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know, thank you so much for being here. I couldn't do this without the support that has been huge, and just continuing to grow with every episode that comes out. But, as always, please continue to like, subscribe, write reviews, tell your friends, share the show on YouTube, links, all that kind of stuff. Any little bit that you, my friends, can do to help get this show to be heard by more people is mo better. I'm told the show is doing quite well. However, I'm greedy, so let's just work on some like world domination or something like that, eh? If you haven't already, please follow the show on Instagram. That is at Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know. If you want just me, I am at Matt O'Donnell. If you have questions, comments, concerns, complaints, let's stay away from the complaints. But if you have them, you can email them to me at mattodonnellwantstoKnow@gmail.com. Lots of great episodes in the pipeline as we speak. More friends, more strangers, more just stuff that we can all find out about together. That'll do it for this time. Here comes one more great Steven Williamson mix. Be sure and take care of yourself out there. And remember, the best answer to a question is usually another question. See ya!